Decades have passed since the tragic abduction and brutal murder of 9-year-old Christine Jessup, a heart-wrenching event that shattered her serene neighborhood. The years that followed were filled with sorrow for her family, as relentless investigators sought to uncover the truth behind this heinous crime. At long last, the Jessup family has found closure. Our narrative transports us to the quaint town of Queensville, Ontario, during the 1980s. This charming locale featured a modest collection of homes encircling a general store, a church, a cemetery, and a playground, where the faces of the townsfolk were well known to one another, and doors were often left ajar. Parents felt secure allowing their children to roam freely, provided they returned home before dusk. On that fateful Wednesday, October 3rd, 1984, the tranquility of Queensville lulled Janet Jessup into a false sense of security, leading her to delay her return home to greet her daughter, Christine, after school. Christine was a spirited explorer, a resourceful and imaginative child who delighted in spending hours in the graveyard behind her home. Like her older brother Kenny, she had a passion for baseball, but her true affection lay with animals. Her loyal dog, Freckles, was her constant companion, and she also cared for a pet frog named Harold, which resided in the damp basement of their farmhouse. In a display of her nurturing spirit, she once spent the night outdoors with baby chicks to keep them company. On that October afternoon, Christine returned from school, bubbling with excitement to share her impressive achievements from music class with her mother and brother. She was aware that her father, Bob Jessup, would not be there, as he was serving an 18-month sentence in the Toronto East Detention Centre for defrauding elderly family friends. Upon entering her family's 2-story farmhouse, Christine quickly realized that her mother and brother were absent. Unfazed, she rummaged through the change jar for a coin and set off to the nearby store to purchase a pack of gum. Earlier that day, Christine Jessup had arranged to meet her friend, Leslie Chipman, at the park at precisely 4 p.m., conveniently located just across the street from the shop where she had purchased a piece of gum. As the clock struck 4 p.m., Leslie arrived at the park, eagerly awaiting Christine's arrival. However, by 10 minutes past the hour, Janet Jessup returned home with her son, Kenny. Upon arrival, she noticed Christine's red bicycle tipped over outside, its kickstand broken. Inside, they discovered Christine's jacket hanging on a hook, positioned far above what her height would allow. The mail and newspaper had been collected, and Christine's school bag rested on the counter. As the sun began to set around 5 p.m., Christine Jessup had yet to return home, a situation that was decidedly out of character for her. Alarmed, Janet resolved to search for her daughter in the familiar haunts she frequented. She ventured to the park and the nearby graveyard, calling out for Christine. In her desperation, she reached out to Christine's friends, including Leslie Chipman. Leslie informed Janet that she had indeed waited for Christine at the park, but after hours of anticipation with no sign of her, she had returned home. This revelation sent a wave of anxiety through Janet. She struggled to maintain her composure, sensing that something was amiss. The bond between mother and daughter was profound. They shared everything. While Janet allowed her children a degree of independence, she typically had a clear understanding of their whereabouts. Regret washed over her for not being home in time to greet Christine after school. A mere 20 minutes of delay had led to the inexplicable disappearance of her beloved daughter, sweet, sensitive, spirited Christine. As darkness enveloped the day, Janet made the decision to contact the York Regional Police for assistance. During that time, missing children cases were not uncommon, yet they were usually resolved with answers within a mere 48 hours. Parental abduction or a child running away was typically the prevailing rationale for a missing child during that era. However, in the case of Christine Jessup, neither explanation held any weight. Both of her parents were present and accounted for, and Christine was not the type of child to simply leave home. During her weekend visits to her grandparents, she would always reach out to her family, eager to hear their voices and share a warm greeting. In the 1980s, the York police force was modest in size, with a mere one officer for every 860 residents, lacking a dedicated major crimes unit. This police department had never encountered a case involving child abduction or murder, and their inexperience became evident as they began their investigation. Reports indicate that upon arriving at the Jessup residence, an officer carelessly removed Christine's jacket from its hook for examination. Investigators reportedly entered through the back and side doors, neglecting to secure the scene. A plastic bag that had contained a newspaper was discarded without a thorough check for fingerprints that could have belonged to the perpetrator. Furthermore, the Jessup home was not cordoned off as a crime scene, allowing neighbors to wander in and out, inadvertently disturbing potential evidence that could have been vital if Christine had been taken from her home. The police organized a search party, enlisting the help of Queensville residents to conduct a series of random area searches, yet these efforts bore no fruit. Christine seemed to have vanished without a trace, leaving no indication of her whereabouts. Her disappearance sent shockwaves through the close-knit community of Queensville, where residents prided themselves on looking out for one another. The question lingered: how could a 9-year-old girl simply disappear? Mark Johnson, a volunteer in the search party, noted the palpable anxiety and concern that enveloped the townspeople. In her poignant reflection, she expressed a profound disbelief that such an event could transpire in their midst. Given the gravity of the circumstances, Bob Jessup was subsequently released from incarceration on humanitarian grounds. Together, Bob and Janet earnestly appealed to the public for assistance in securing their daughter's safe return. The authorities understood that kidnappings were rarely acts of chance. They suspected that the abduction of Christine Jessup was orchestrated by someone who likely had an established connection with the family. Consequently, they requested the Jessups to provide the names and contact information of individuals permitted in their home in the absence of family members. Among the names submitted was Calvin Hoover, a close family friend and colleague of Bob Jessup. The day following Christine's disappearance, Heather Hoover, Calvin's wife, promptly arrived in Queensville to offer solace to Janet and assist the family in any capacity she could. Sergeant Raymond Bunce of the York Police conducted an interview with Heather, who claimed she was at her workplace during the time of Christine's abduction. When questioned about her husband's whereabouts that day, she asserted that Calvin was also at work. After addressing all inquiries, Heather requested to leave, citing the need to return home to her husband and children. Notably, Calvin Hoover was never subjected to questioning. Calvin, a 28-year-old tradesman from Scarborough, was characterized by his dark hair, prominent front teeth, and a slender visage that appeared even more elongated behind his oversized spectacles. Known for his indulgent lifestyle, which included drinking, revelry, and gambling, he possessed an undeniable charm that captivated any room he entered. Yet, beneath this facade lay a selfish nature, indifferent to the needs of others. While he was perceived as amiable by acquaintances and colleagues, those closest to him recognized a troubling propensity for vindictiveness. Calvin Hoover first crossed paths with his beloved wife, Heather, during the vibrant mid-1970s. Following their union, Calvin embraced Heather's 2 sons as his own, and together they welcomed 2 additional boys into their family. Their charming abode was nestled in a quaint housing development just west of the renowned Toronto Zoo. Both Calvin and Heather were employed at Eastern Independent Telecom, a modest yet esteemed communications firm in Markham, specializing in telephone wiring for local businesses. While Heather thrived in the dispatch department, Calvin honed his skills in installations under the guidance of Bob Jessup, Christine's father, who held the esteemed position of lead installer at that time. The dynamic nature of Calvin's role afforded him the luxury of mobility, allowing him to step away from work for hours without a trace. As time passed, a deep camaraderie blossomed between Calvin and Bob Jessup, leading to frequent gatherings of their families for delightful barbecues and joyous birthday celebrations. The bond between Janet and Heather flourished, with Janet affectionately dubbing Heather the Goofy Newfie. On numerous occasions, Heather took on the role of caregiver for Christine Jessup, who lovingly referred to her as Auntie Heather. Despite the 50-kilometer distance separating their homes, Janet and Heather cherished their regular tea sessions, relishing the opportunity to reconnect while their children played. Remarkably, they had shared one such visit just 2 days prior to Christine's mysterious disappearance. On October 1st, 1984, Janet Jessup brought her 2 children, Kenny and Christine, to the Hoovers' residence. Overwhelmed by the demands of parenting while her husband was incarcerated, she sought the comforting presence of her friend Heather for much-needed encouragement. Upon her arrival, Janet confided in Heather about her plans to visit Bob in jail with Kenny in 2 days. It is conceivable that Calvin Hoover may have overheard this exchange, leading him to realize that Christine would be home alone. Alternatively, it is possible that Heather innocently relayed Janet's intentions to Calvin, setting the stage for the events that would follow. 2 days later, on October 3rd, 1984, Calvin Hoover made a fateful decision that would alter the course of many lives. It was believed that Christine Jessup, familiar with Hoover as a family friend, likely entered his vehicle without hesitation. He may have assured her he was taking her to her family, a notion that would have undoubtedly thrilled her. As days turned into weeks, the Jessup family and law enforcement remained oblivious to the fact that the perpetrator was lurking in plain sight. The investigation grew cold, leaving the Jessups to cling to hope for the safe return of their beloved daughter and sister. When Christmas arrived, the absence of Christine cast a shadow over the Jessup home, rendering the festive season devoid of joy. No twinkling tree adorned the living room, and Kenny received only a handful of gifts. By December 31st, 1984, 3 months later, as the world prepared to welcome a new year, Fred Patterson and his 2 daughters ventured into the expansive woods adjacent to their home in Sunderland, just 56 kilometers east of Queensville, in search of their missing dog. After some time, Patterson stumbled upon a sight that sent chills down his spine. A mound that resembled discarded refuse beside a partially excavated pit. As he approached, horror gripped him. It was the severely decomposed body of a young girl. The medical examiner would later confirm that the child had suffered multiple deep stab wounds to the chest, which were determined to be the cause of death. The body was clad in a beige turtleneck sweater, a blue pullover, and a blouse missing several buttons. Nearby, a pair of little girl's panties lay close to the right foot, and a recorder inscribed with the name Christine Jessup was discovered nestled in the tall grass. The heartbreaking news shattered Christine's family, plunging them into inconsolable grief. Their agonizing wait had concluded, but a lifetime of mourning now lay ahead. With Christine's remains found in Durham Region, the case was transferred from the York Police to the Durham Regional Police, where Inspector Robert Brown took charge of the investigation. The police were plagued by questions surrounding the discovery of Christine's body in Sunderland. This area, characterized by its winding country roads, expansive farmland, and dense forests, was in close proximity to Queensville. Unbeknownst to the investigators, the perpetrator had deliberately selected this locale for his heinous acts, owing to his intimate knowledge of the region. It was rumored that he had a school friend residing merely a few kilometers from the scene of the crime, with whom he frequently engaged in kayaking and backcountry camping adventures. He was well acquainted with the terrain, having navigated it countless times. He led Christine a short distance into the thick woods, ensuring they would remain unseen by any passing vehicles. Inspector Brown dedicated himself to the case, working tirelessly day and night. He organized his detectives into 2 teams, each laboring diligently to uncover the perpetrator. They pursued every lead, with the exception of the neglected boxes of notes from the York Regional Police investigation. Among these boxes lay a notebook containing the perpetrator's name and address, yet the Durham Regional Police dismissed the York Regional Police's findings as amateurish and unworthy of consideration. Instead, they chased other leads, including a family friend who had made unsettling remarks, a neighborhood youth known for carrying a knife, and even Janet Jessup. Unfortunately, none of these avenues yielded the answers they sought. Throughout the investigation, the perpetrator's name remained conspicuously absent. On February 14, 1985, Detectives Fitz and Shep, part of one of the investigative teams, visited Christine's family to request an additional list of potential suspects, individuals they believed could have harmed their beloved daughter. The Jessups struggled to identify anyone, but the detectives pressed on. Just beyond their backyard lived the Moran family, a close-knit group that included a 25-year-old man named Guy Paul. He was known for his kindness and respectfulness, boasting a clean criminal record. Guy Paul was not one to indulge in drinking or smoking, further complicating the search for suspects. His only infractions with the law consisted of a few speeding tickets. Yet, Janet recalled that Guy Paul refrained from joining the search for Christine Jessup, unlike nearly everyone else in Queensville. Guy Paul, an eccentric figure in the eyes of the detectives, was known for his clarinet skills and his passion for beekeeping. The Morin family, on the other hand, was renowned for their remarkable handyman abilities, capable of mending nearly anything that required attention. Alphonse Morin, the patriarch, a retired engineer, army veteran, and educator, preferred to tackle home repairs himself, often enlisting the help of his 6 children. The Morans were esteemed as kind and reliable neighbors. In fact, just weeks prior to Christine Jessup's disappearance, Janet Jessup had approached them to request their name and address as an emergency contact for Christine, a request to which Alphonse readily consented. Guy Paul Morin was the second youngest among the Morin siblings, sharing his father's keen intellect. Alphonse introduced Guy Paul to welding at the tender age of 10, often challenging him to piece together mechanical clocks that had been deliberately disassembled. They frequently collaborated on car repairs in their backyard. A young man with a passion for woodworking, Guy Paul thrived on solving intricate problems that demanded patience and concentration. His photographic memory allowed him to memorize the serial numbers of his cherished belongings, ensuring their safety in case of theft. By the time Christine Jessup vanished, Guy Paul was an active member of 3 bands, showcasing his prodigious talent on the clarinet. On February 22, 1985, Detectives Fitz and Shep visited the Moran residence, engaging Guy Paul in conversation and inviting him into their vehicle for a casual discussion. When asked about his acquaintance with Christine Jessup, he replied that their relationship was minimal, largely due to the significant age difference, Christine being over 16 years his junior, resulting in little opportunity for interaction. He professed to have once assisted her in capturing Freckles, her spirited dog, which had escaped its confines. He also reminisced about their discussions on gardening. His final encounter with the Jessups occurred when he visited to help reignite the pilot light on their furnace. The investigators probed him regarding his activities on the day Christine vanished. Moran asserted that he had been employed at a furniture manufacturing plant located at Steeles and Weston, a distance of 57 kilometers to the south. However, Detectives Fitz and Shep later uncovered that Guy Paul had departed work early, around 3:32 p.m. This indicated that he could not have arrived home before 4:14 p.m., a timeline that seemed too late for him to have abducted Christine Jessup prior to Janet and Kenny's return at 4:10 p.m. They further inquired why he had not participated in the search for Christine. Guy Paul Moran replied that had Christine's family requested his assistance, he would have eagerly joined the effort, but at that moment he and his father were engaged in the installation of weeping tile around the foundation of their home. His explanation was coherent, and his alibi appeared unassailable. Yet Fitz and Shep regarded him as a person of interest. The detectives then engaged Guy Paul in a light-hearted dialogue, inquiring about his thoughts on Christine Jessup. He characterized her as sweet and innocent, but added, "Yet they sometimes grow up to be corrupt," a statement that, while generally true, reflecting the loss of childhood innocence as girls mature, struck the detectives as a sinister implication regarding Christine's character. Following their conversation, Guy Paul returned home and resumed his ordinary life. In the aftermath of Christine Jessup's tragic murder, Calvin Hoover maintained a conspicuous silence. He audaciously attended Christine's funeral and wake, seamlessly blending into the crowd while extending his condolences to the grieving family. Calvin Hoover represented the detective's most formidable challenge. He possessed no criminal history and exhibited no signs of deviance. He was neither boisterous nor ostentatious, ensuring he remained inconspicuous. Calvin Hoover exercised a degree of caution, managing to avoid detection while picking up Christine Jessup after school. Yet, in his haste to commit his crime, he left behind a series of clues. Traces of his semen were later discovered on Christine's undergarments, and a solitary dark hair was found entwined in her necklace. This hair was submitted for forensic analysis, specifically aimed at matching it to Guy Paul Moran's DNA. Guy Paul Moran, who had attended a jazz rehearsal, was approached by the bandleader's daughter, accompanied by her friend, an undercover police officer. She was conducting a cosmetics class project focused on hair analysis and requested permission to collect a few strands from the musicians. Captivated by her charm, Moran readily consented. She gathered hair from everyone, but ultimately discarded all except for his. The undercover officer then passed Moran's hair to her colleagues, Fitz and Shep, who transported it to the Center of Forensic Sciences for DNA examination. However, the forensic scientist did not conduct a thorough DNA analysis. Instead, she merely compared the hair color from Christine's necklace to Moran's, concluding that they were consistent. This flimsy evidence was sufficient for Detective Shep and Fitz to apprehend the innocent man. On the evening of April 22, 1985, as Guy Paul Moran drove to band practice, he noticed police lights flashing in his rearview mirror, assuming he was being stopped for a seatbelt violation. Unbeknownst to him, 14 other officers were present in the vicinity. When 2 officers approached his vehicle, he was taken aback to see the detectives he had previously spoken with regarding Christine Jessup. Assuming it was a minor issue, he greeted them casually, "What's up, guys?" To his shock, Fitz and Shep informed him that he was being arrested for the murder of Christine Jessup. A bewildered Moran could only respond, "What? You're joking?" Regrettably, they were not. The police escorted Moran to their headquarters, and as he made his way to the interrogation room, he caught sight of a familiar figure. The woman who had yanked his hair during band practice, now fabricating details about the cosmetics analysis. In that moment, Guy Paul Moran realized he had erred innocently and was about to endure the full force of the law for an offense he had no part in. Meanwhile, Calvin Hoover, who had been following the developments surrounding Christine's tragic demise, picked up a newspaper 2 days post Moran's arrest and was met with the headline, "Musician who lived next door, charged with Christine Jessup murder." A wave of relief washed over him, knowing that the pursuit of the true perpetrator might pause, perhaps indefinitely. His wife, Heather Hoover, who cherished a photograph of Christine gifted to her by the young girl, frequently visited the cemetery. During these somber moments, Calvin remained by her side, offering solace as she grieved. Following Moran's arrest, Bob and Janet Jessup were taken aback by the revelation that their daughter's murderer had resided just beyond their backyard. In a media interview, Janet expressed her disbelief, stating, "Last summer they came over and shared honey from their bees. They were so kind to us. That's why this is such a shock. For Detectives Fitz and Shep, the straightforward task of identifying a suspect had been accomplished. The real challenge lay in uncovering compelling evidence to secure a conviction against Guy Paul Morin for Christine Jessup's murder. They meticulously examined Morin's unassailable alibi and determined that he could not have traversed the 57 kilometers from his workplace to his residence in time to abduct Christine before Janet and Kenny returned home at 4:10 p.m. They retraced Janet and Kenny's route on the day Christine vanished, suggesting that Janet might have misremembered the precise time of her arrival. However, Janet firmly refuted this notion, asserting that she had immediately checked the wall clock upon entering the house. As time progressed, the detective's relentless questioning ultimately led her to reconsider her timeline, and she then stated she returned home much later. At the trial, the prosecution presented tenuous evidence in an attempt to label Guy Paul Morin as the perpetrator of the murder. A cigarette butt discovered near Christine's body was nearly introduced as incriminating evidence, until it was established that Morin was not a smoker. The Morin family testified that their son had not returned home on the day Christine vanished until 5:30 p.m., having stopped for groceries and fuel after work. A psychologist who assessed the Morin family described them as part of a secretive and protective pathological family dynamic. In a controversial move, the police placed an undercover sergeant, Gordon Hobbs, in Morin's cell. Hobbs later returned to court with dubious claims, asserting that Morin had made stabbing gestures toward his own chest, supposedly reenacting the murder of Christine Jessup. To further complicate matters, Hobbs alleged that Morin had confessed, stating, "I would redrum the innocent." Morin vehemently refuted this narrative, explaining that he had merely referenced the 1980 horror film, The Shining, where a child repeatedly utters redrum, the reverse of murder. Unable to recall the film's title at that moment, he had used redrum instead. This accusation seemed to seal Morin's fate, instilling fear in his lawyer about the potential loss of the case. Ultimately, after the initial trial, Morin was acquitted. However, with no alternative suspect and the community of Queensville gripped by fear for their children's safety, the verdict was contested, leading to a subsequent trial. In this second trial, at the age of 32, Morin was sentenced to life imprisonment. When the judge inquired if he had any remarks, Morin reiterated his long-standing assertion since his arrest on the way to band practice, declaring, "I am not guilty of this crime. It's a travesty of justice what's happened today. I'm appealing." Morin was subsequently handcuffed and transported to the Elgin Middlesex Detention Centre in London, where he remained for a period before being moved to a federal prison. During Morin's incarceration, Calvin Hoover and his family resided in a two-story residence in Oshawa, gradually succumbing to financial difficulties. By 1991, Hoover had declared bankruptcy, burdened with debts of $28,000 against meager assets of merely $11,000. He grappled with various health issues, including undiagnosed bipolar disorder, depression, and panic attacks, often resorting to alcohol and drugs for fleeting solace. Within the prison walls, Morin was perceived as the most egregious offender among the inmates due to his convictions for child rape and murder, making him a target for their ire. Fortunately, the most formidable inmate took heed of Morin's plight and believed in his innocence, advising others to refrain from harming him. Nevertheless, Morin's existence was fraught with peril, as he faced threats from all sides. By 1993, while some still suspected his guilt, a significant portion of the Ontario populace rallied behind the belief that Morin was innocent and deserved bail. A renewed sense of hope emerged as he enlisted the services of a new attorney, James Lockyer, alongside co-counsel Joanne McLean. In February 1993, Morin was granted bail after his legal team successfully filed for an appeal. At that juncture, he had endured 2.5 years of courtroom battles and nearly 18 months confined across 6 different facilities. His parents, Alphonse and Ida Morin, had repeatedly mortgaged their home to cover their son's mounting legal expenses, which totaled approximately $500,000. Morin's appeal was scheduled to commence in January 1995. His legal team meticulously reviewed the previous trials and soon discovered significant advancements in DNA testing. All evidence collected from Christine's crime scene was subjected to retesting, including Christine's panties, which, along with Morin's DNA, were sent to a forensic laboratory for analysis. In the days leading up to the trial, a laboratory analysis revealed that the semen found on Christine's panties did not correspond with the DNA of Guy Paul Morin. Just 3 days later, this finding was confirmed, leading to Morin's exoneration and a subsequent release. All charges against him were dismissed, and his criminal record was expunged. The Ontario government awarded Guy Paul Morin a settlement of $1.2 million. Although he could have sought a larger sum through a prolonged trial, he had already endured enough courtroom battles and was acutely aware of the system's sluggish pace. Additionally, his father's health was in decline. Despite the declaration of his innocence, the public continued to perceive Guy Paul Morin as a murderer, as the true killer of Christine Jessup remained at large. Calvin Hoover, a man plagued by alcoholism, would deceive his family about his whereabouts, opting instead to frequent local taverns. Upon learning of Morin's acquittal, particularly the role of DNA evidence in his exoneration, Calvin was gripped by fear and likely regretted not having returned to lay Christine Jessup to rest before her body was discovered. His negligence at the crime scene, where he left behind damning evidence, made him acutely aware that it was only a matter of time before law enforcement would come to confront him. By 1996, Calvin Hoover and his family had relocated to a low-income housing complex, and their marriage was on the brink of collapse. At this juncture, the Hoovers had severed ties with Bob and Janet Jessup, who had since divorced. Calvin fell deeper into the abyss of gambling and substance abuse. One fateful night, intoxicated, he crashed his truck, resulting in a DUI charge and the suspension of his license for a year. This incident proved to be the final straw for Heather Hoover, leading to her decision to divorce him. Undeterred, Calvin continued to pursue work, women, gambling, and drugs. He developed a close bond with a co-worker from Burlington named Joanne, with whom he shared a mutual passion for gambling. In 2003, they sealed their connection with a wedding in Las Vegas. Calvin Hoover's joy was fleeting, as he lost Joanne to natural causes in 2009, never having the chance to uncover the true nature of her husband. Haunted by numerous inner struggles, Hoover faced sleepless nights, tormenting thoughts, bouts of depression, and panic attacks. Overwhelmed by these challenges, he attempted to take his own life in 2014 through a motor vehicle incident, but he survived. Detective Smith, who was just 13 years old in 1984 when Christine Jessup was murdered, grew up in Hamilton, enjoying various games with his friends. He vividly recalls the day Christine went missing, and the case has lingered in his mind for years. In 1996, he joined the Toronto Police Force and has since contributed to solving some of the nation's most challenging cases. When he was assigned to the Homicide Department in 2019, he developed a keen interest in cold cases, expressing, "These families have waited so long for answers." Due to the mishandling of Christine Jessup's case by the Durham Police, it was reassigned to the Toronto Police. Smith expanded the team working on the case, pursuing numerous leads and eliminating a list of 300 individuals through DNA testing, but to no avail. In May 2019, he learned of a 2-week forensic genealogy seminar at the Ontario Police College. Although he was not well versed in forensic genealogy, he was aware of its successful application in a case the previous year. This method had not been previously utilized in Canada, but upon receiving approval from the Toronto Police to apply genetic testing to a cold case, he chose to focus on Christine Jessup's situation. He submitted DNA from Christine's underwear to Orthrum, a genetic testing company based in Texas, which created a profile and uploaded it to a database known as GEDmatch. They began constructing a family tree to identify potential suspects. This endeavor was both time-consuming and costly, yet Detective Smith remained resolute in his pursuit. After transforming a complex family maze into a comprehensive family tree comprising 33,000 descendants, the genealogist successfully identified Calvin Hoover as the individual linked to the sperm found on Christine's underwear. However, Smith was unfamiliar with the name. Upon reviewing Christine's case file, he noted that Hoover had never been listed as a suspect. Despite Hoover's close ties to the Jessup family and his frequent access to their home, he had not been interviewed by the police for over 30 years. To ascertain Hoover's residence and any potential criminal history, Smith entered his name into two police databases, CPIC and Versadex. Unfortunately, he soon discovered that Calvin Hoover had passed away in 2015. Prior to Smith's tenure in the homicide department, Hoover had lived in a modest bungalow outside Port Hope with one of his sons. He was described as a troubled, anxious, and reclusive individual. At one point, his doctor had prescribed clonazepam to help with his anxiety and panic attacks, but it proved ineffective. According to one of his sons, Hoover expressed that the medication was messing with his head. One day, while his son attended a wedding, Hoover, left alone, opened a bottle of red wine, retreated to the garage, sealed the door with tape, donned headphones, and activated the generator, allowing carbon monoxide to accumulate. When his son returned, he found his father slumped over in a lawn chair, an open bottle of sedatives beside him. In the main bedroom's bathroom, the family discovered a yellow sticky note on the mirror that read, "Hope you all have a good life." Calvin Hoover chose to end his life without revealing the truth about his actions, missing the opportunity to confess and clear Guy Paul Morin's name. He also left his former friends, Bob and Janet Jessup, without resolution to their long-standing mystery, taking his secrets to the grave. Detective Steve Smith felt a deep sense of loss upon learning of Hoover's death 4 years prior. It indicated that he would evade accountability for his malevolent actions. To definitively ascertain whether Calvin Hoover was responsible for the murder of Christine Jessup, Smith and his team visited the coroner's office, where blood samples from Calvin Hoover had been collected posthumously. These samples were subjected to DNA testing to see if they matched the DNA found on Christine Jessup's underwear. The results confirmed a match. After 36 long years, detectives were finally able to inform Christine Jessup's family and friends about the identity of her killer. Upon learning of her ex-husband's heinous act, Heather Hoover expressed her disbelief, stating, "For 10 years, he showed no signs. How can someone do that? He watched me visit her grave site for a decade. I never truly knew this man." Janet Jessup conveyed a sense of relief, but lamented that her daughter could not have lived to see this day. Kenny Jessup, Christine's brother, shared his mixed emotions. "I feel relief that we finally have the answer we've been waiting for. I'm angry about who it is. It's frustrating and sad. This case could never have a straightforward resolution. It had to involve someone we were familiar with." Bob Jessup, Christine's father, expressed his heartbreak, saying, "It devastates me. If I could, I would confront him directly. He must have been deeply troubled. While I am grateful to know who it was, I doubt I will find peace in sleep." When police approached Guy Paul Morin to apologize for his wrongful conviction and to reveal the identity of Christine Jessup's killer, he remarked, "I am pleased that there is closure for the Jessups. Peace of mind is something I always anticipated. The justice system let me down, but science ultimately redeemed me." Morin felt a sense of relief that his name could now be cleared. Friends and family fondly remembered Christine Jessup as a well-mannered, thoughtful child who was exceptional in every regard. She was a girl who cherished life, her family, school, and sports.